Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing.
For decades, the world blamed Elvis Presley for his own death at just 42 years old. But in 2023, scientists examined his DNA and found something heartbreaking. Why did his doctors miss the signs? What terrible conditions were hiding in his genes? Join us as we reveal the DNA secrets that changes everything. The King's Hidden Battle. When scientists finally got their hands on Elvis Presley's DNA samples in 2023, they expected to find answers about the King of Rock and Roll's mysterious death. What they discovered instead would shake everything the world thought it knew about the man behind the legend. The truth had been buried for decades, hidden in the very fabric of his being. August 16, 1977, the day the music faded. Elvis Aaron Presley was found lifeless on the bathroom floor of his beloved Graceland mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. He was only 42 years old, but the man lying there that afternoon looked nothing like the young electric performer who had once set the world on fire with his voice and his moves. Elvis found that tragic day bloated and heavy, his once handsome face puffy and unrecognizable. His body had swelled to over 250 pounds. The lean, beautiful young man who made teenage girls scream and faint had disappeared years ago, replaced by someone who could barely climb the stairs or catch his breath after a simple walk. How had this happened to someone so young? How had the most famous entertainer in the world fallen so far, so fast? The official story came quickly. Heart attack, prescription substance misuse. The world was told that Elvis had become addicted to pills, that he had destroyed himself through excess and poor choices. Doctors pointed to the cocktail of medications found in his system. The media painted a picture of a fallen star who had lost control, who had given in to the dark side of fame. Case closed. But nothing about that story ever truly made sense. Elvis had been sick for years before his death, suffering in ways that went far beyond simple substance addiction. He experienced crushing chest pains that left him gasping for air. His body bloated and swelled in strange ways. He dealt with severe digestive problems that caused him agonizing pain. His vision blurred and darkened. He could barely sleep, yet felt exhausted all the time. These were not just the symptoms of someone taking too many pills. Something deeper was destroying him from the inside out. For decades, the questions remained. Why did such a vibrant, talented young man deteriorate so rapidly? Why did his body seem to attack itself? Why couldn't the best doctors and the most expensive treatments save him? Elvis had access to everything money could buy, yet nothing helped. He grew sicker and weaker with each passing year, trapped in a body that was betraying him in ways no one understood. Then, in 2023, a team of researchers decided to search for real answers. They obtained DNA samples and began a comprehensive genetic study of the King of Rock and Roll. What they hoped to find were clues. What they actually discovered was a medical tragedy that had been hidden for nearly 50 years. The DNA told a story that changed everything. Elvis had not simply been a substance addict who threw his life away. He had been fighting battles that existed in his very cells, conditions that were written into his genetic code from the moment he was born. His body had been programmed for tragedy, carrying multiple genetic disorders that were slowly destroying him throughout his entire life. The scientists were stunned. Every symptom, every mysterious illness, every rapid decline suddenly made terrible sense. Elvis had been suffering from conditions his doctors never understood and could never diagnose with the medical knowledge of the 1970s. He had been living with genetic time bombs that were always going to explode, no matter how hard he tried to stay healthy or how many pills he took to manage his pain. But before understanding what the DNA revealed, we need to go back to where it all began. The seeds of Elvis's tragedy were planted on a cold January morning in Mississippi, where a devastating loss would mark him forever. A twin's shadow and family secrets, January 8, 1935, Tupelo, Mississippi. In a tiny two-room house built by his father's own hands, Gladys Presley went into labor. She was only 22 years old, poor and frightened, about to give birth in the middle of the Great Depression. What should have been a joyful moment became the first tragedy in a life that would be marked by sorrow. The first baby came early in the morning, already gone from this world. Jesse Garon Presley, Elvis's identical twin brother, was born stillborn. The tiny body was perfect in every way except one. He would never take a breath. 35 minutes later, Elvis Aaron Presley arrived, crying and alive. One twin dead, one twin living. From his very first moment on Earth, Elvis carried the weight of loss. Gladys was destroyed by the death of Jesse. She sank into a grief so deep that it never truly left her. She buried her dead son in an unmarked grave because the family was too poor to afford a proper headstone. For the rest of her life, she would tell Elvis that he was special, that he had to live for both himself and his lost brother. She poured all her love, all her pain, all her desperate hope into her surviving son. This created a bond between mother and child that went far beyond normal. Elvis and Gladys were unnaturally close, almost like they were one person instead of two. She protected him fiercely, worried constantly, and rarely let him out of her sight. Elvis grew up feeling responsible for being enough for both brothers, carrying guilt that he had survived while Jesse passed away. It was a heavy burden for any child to bear, but there was something else happening in the Presley family that no one paid attention to at the time. Gladys herself was often sick with mysterious problems that doctors could not explain. She suffered from severe liver issues and struggled with her health throughout Elvis's childhood. She was anxious and depressed, often turning to alcohol to cope with her pain. Her own mother had passed away young of tuberculosis. Health problems seemed to run in her family like a dark river flowing through generations. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, came from similar stock. His family struggled with their own health issues, though poverty and lack of medical care meant most problems went undiagnosed and untreated. The Presleys lived hard lives and their bodies showed the strain. Young Elvis was a sickly child. He caught every illness that passed through town. He suffered from terrible anxiety that made his stomach hurt and kept him up at night. He was nervous and sensitive, crying easily and clinging to his mother. Other kids teased him for being weak and strange, but Gladys just held him closer, convinced that her special boy needed extra protection. The family lived in crushing poverty. They moved constantly, always one step ahead of being homeless. Vernon struggled to keep work, and even spent time in prison when Elvis was small. The stress was enormous. They never had enough food, enough money, enough stability. Elvis grew up hungry and scared, watching his parents struggle and feeling helpless to fix anything. Then came 1958, when Elvis was 23 and already a massive star. Gladys fell seriously ill. Her liver was failing, her body breaking down rapidly. Elvis rushed home from his army service in Germany, desperate to see his mother, but he was too late to save her. Gladys Presley passed away at just 46 years old, taking a piece of her son's heart with her into the grave. Elvis never recovered from losing his mother. He stood at her funeral and sobbed like a lost child. Friends said something inside him faded that day alongside Gladys. He started having panic attacks. His health problems grew worse. The loss awakened something dark in him that would never go back to sleep. What no one realized then, what no one could have known, was that Gladys had passed more than just grief to her son. Hidden inside both of them was genetic code that carried the blueprints for disease and early death. The health problems that plagued mother and son were not just bad luck or hard living. They were written into their DNA, inherited markers that determined their fate before they were even born. Scientists would later discover that the tragic story of the Presley family was told in their genes. Every illness, every early death, every mysterious symptom was connected to genetic conditions passed down through generations. Elvis had inherited a deadly legacy from both his mother and father, genetic mutations that made his body vulnerable in ways he could never escape. As Elvis climbed to heights of fame beyond imagination, his body was already counting down to disaster. The genetic problems hiding in his cells were waking up, and soon they would destroy him in front of the whole world. The rise and the hidden symptoms. Everything changed for Elvis in 1954 when he walked into Sun Records in Memphis and recorded his first song. By 1956, he was the biggest star in America. Teenagers screamed his name. Parents called him dangerous. Every record he released shot straight to #1. He appeared on television and millions watched. He was only 21 years old, and the whole world wanted a piece of him. But fame came with a price nobody talked about. Elvis went from playing small clubs to massive stadiums almost overnight. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, booked him constantly, pushing him to perform night after night without rest. There were recording sessions, television appearances, photo shoots, and interviews that never seemed to end. Elvis barely had time to sleep, let alone take care of himself. The pressure was crushing. Elvis started complaining about problems that everyone dismissed as just stress. He got terrible headaches that felt like his skull was splitting apart. His stomach hurt constantly, twisting and churning with pain. He could not fall asleep no matter how exhausted he felt. When he finally did sleep, nightmares woke him up in a cold sweat. Doctors gave him pills for everything. Pills to wake up, pills to calm down, pills to sleep, pills to perform. They told him this was normal, that all big stars needed help managing their schedules. Nobody thought to look deeper into why such a young, strong man needed so much medical help just to get through the day. The prescription bottles started piling up, and Elvis trusted that doctors knew what was best. Colonel Parker did not care about Elvis's health. He only cared about money and keeping his star working. The schedule got worse instead of better. Elvis filmed movie after movie through the 1960s, sometimes making 3 films a year. The movie studios worked him like a machine, expecting him to memorize lines, perform songs, do stunts, and look perfect for the cameras no matter how terrible he felt. His marriage to Priscilla in 1967 added more stress. Elvis loved her, but he also felt trapped by the expectations of being a husband and maintaining his image as the ultimate star. He worried constantly about staying attractive and relevant. The pressure to be perfect was eating him alive from the inside out. Then there was his time in the Army, from 1958 to 1960. While other soldiers got some rest, Elvis was treated like a celebrity even in uniform. The Army took him away from performing but gave him no real break. Instead, it was during his service in Germany that his mother passed away, destroying him emotionally. He started taking even more pills to cope with the grief and the stress of military life. Throughout the 1960s, Elvis's body began showing clear signs of struggle. His weight went up and down like a roller coaster. Sometimes he looked thin and gaunt, other times he appeared puffy and swollen. He would have sudden bursts of wild energy followed by crashes where he could barely move. His mood swung from happy and playful to dark and paranoid within hours. He became increasingly dependent on amphetamines to stay awake and perform, then needed barbiturates to finally fall asleep at night. It became a vicious cycle. The uppers made his heart race and his hands shake. The downers left him groggy and confused. But doctors kept prescribing more instead of questioning why a young man in his 20s and 30s needed such powerful medications just to function. Elvis believed he was invincible. He thought because doctors gave him the pills, they must be safe. He trusted that his body would always bounce back, that he could push through anything. He grew paranoid about people judging him, worried that fans would abandon him if they knew he was struggling. So he hid his problems and kept performing, kept smiling, kept being Elvis even when every cell in his body was screaming for help. What nobody understood was that Elvis was not just tired or stressed. His doctors were treating surface symptoms while missing the war raging inside his cells. The genetic conditions inherited from his parents were beginning to express themselves, attacking his organs and systems in ways that 1960s medicine could not detect or understand. Every pill he took masked the real problems. Every performance exhausted a body that was already fighting invisible battles. The tragedy was that Elvis looked fine on the outside. He was still handsome, still talented, still beloved. Nobody realized that underneath the surface, his body was slowly breaking down. The genetic time bombs were ticking louder with each passing year. By the time Elvis returned to live performing in 1969, his body was already falling apart. The Vegas years would push him past his breaking point, and the genetic diseases hiding in his DNA were about to reveal their terrible power. The DNA reveals multiple genetic conditions. In 2023, nearly 50 years after Elvis passed away, a team of scientists decided to finally search for real answers. They obtained DNA samples from hair clippings and other biological materials that had been preserved over the decades. Using modern genetic testing technology that did not exist in Elvis's lifetime, they began mapping his genetic code. What they found was absolutely shocking. The first major discovery hit like a thunderbolt. Elvis carried a genetic mutation for something called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. This condition affects how the body produces a crucial protein that protects the lungs and liver from damage. Without enough of this protein, these organs slowly destroy themselves from the inside out. People with this genetic defect often develop severe liver disease and lung problems at young ages. Suddenly, so much made sense. Elvis's constant breathing difficulties during performances were not just from being out of shape. His lungs were being damaged by his own body. The liver problems that plagued him throughout his life were not just from medications. His genetic code had programmed his liver to fail. This single mutation explained years of mysterious symptoms that doctors had dismissed or treated incorrectly. But the scientists were not done. They found a second devastating genetic marker. Elvis had inherited genes for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition where the heart muscle grows abnormally thick and enlarged. This disease is passed down through families and can cause sudden death, especially in young people. The heart struggles to pump blood properly. It beats irregularly. In severe cases, it simply stops without warning. This explained why Elvis had such terrible problems with his heart in his final years. His chest pains, his irregular heartbeat, his struggles to breathe were all signs that his heart was literally too big and too thick to work correctly. The condition had been inherited from his parents, hidden in his DNA from birth, slowly getting worse as he aged and stressed his body with constant performance. The third discovery revealed genetic markers for immune system disorders. Elvis's body could not fight off infections properly. His immune system was weak and confused, sometimes attacking his own tissues instead of protecting him. This explained why he got sick so easily, why injuries took forever to heal, why he seemed to catch every illness that came near him. Then came the fourth finding that tied everything together. Elvis had genetic mutations linked to chronic pain conditions and connective tissue problems. His body produced faulty proteins that made his joints, muscles, and tissues prone to damage and constant pain. He was not imagining his suffering. His DNA had made him vulnerable to a lifetime of physical agony. The scientists sat back in stunned silence as they realized what they were seeing. Elvis had not been dealing with one genetic problem. He had been fighting multiple genetic diseases simultaneously. Each condition made the others worse. Each mutation attacked a different system in his body. He never had a chance. The perfect storm became clear when researchers looked at how these genetic conditions interacted with all the prescription substances Elvis took. His already damaged liver could not process medications properly because of the alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. The substances built up in his system to toxic levels. His enlarged heart was stressed further by stimulants. His immune problems made him more vulnerable to substance side effects. Everything fed into everything else, creating a downward spiral he could not escape. Even the terrible constipation that tortured Elvis finally made sense. The genetic conditions combined with the medications caused his colon to enlarge and stop working properly, a condition called megacolon. This was not a minor problem. It caused him agonizing pain and contributed to the toxic buildup in his body that ultimately helped weaken him. The scientist's final conclusion was heartbreaking. Elvis Presley had been biologically doomed from birth. He was fighting battles written into his cells that he could never win. No amount of willpower, talent, or love could overcome what his DNA had decided. But the genetic revelations were not finished. Scientists found one more crucial piece of the puzzle in Elvis's DNA, something that explained the darkness in his mind and the psychological torture he endured every single day of his life. The mental health connection and final days. The DNA study revealed one final devastating truth that completed the tragic picture of Elvis's life. Hidden in his genetic code were markers for severe depression and anxiety disorders. These were not character flaws or weaknesses. They were inherited biological conditions that affected how his brain produced and processed chemicals like serotonin and dopamine. Elvis had struggled with dark moods his entire life. Friends described him having periods of deep sadness where he would not leave his room for days. He experienced crippling anxiety that made his heart race and his hands shake. He had paranoid thoughts that people were trying to hurt him or abandon him. Everyone thought this was just his personality or the pressure of fame. But his DNA told a different story. His brain chemistry was wrong from birth. The loss of his twin brother Jesse created psychological trauma that mixed terribly with his genetic predisposition for mental illness. Elvis felt guilty for surviving when his brother passed away. He felt incomplete, like half of him was missing. This trauma activated the depression genes he inherited, triggering a lifelong battle with his own mind. When his mother Gladys passed away in 1958, it flipped a switch inside Elvis that never turned off again. The inherited depressive condition that had been quietly present suddenly roared to life. He sank into grief so deep that he never truly climbed out. The genetic mental health issues combined with unbearable loss created a perfect storm in his brain. This created a vicious cycle that destroyed him. The genetic mental health problems made him anxious and unable to sleep, so he took pills to calm down and rest. But those pills interacted badly with his genetic physical conditions, making his body sicker. The sicker he got physically, the worse his depression and anxiety became. He took more pills to cope with the mental anguish, which damaged his organs further. Round and round it went, each problem feeding the others. By his final months in 1977, Elvis knew something was terribly wrong. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. He could feel his body shutting down. He tried desperately to get healthy through crash diets where he would eat almost nothing, then bizarre health regimens involving strange foods and vitamins. Nothing worked because nothing could fix what was broken in his genes. His bodyguards, who loved him like a brother, wrote books after his death exposing how bad things had gotten. They described finding Elvis confused and unable to speak clearly. They talked about him falling down, forgetting where he was, struggling to perform basic tasks. They were watching him pass away in slow motion and felt powerless to stop it. His last performances were heartbreaking to watch. Elvis could barely move on stage. He forgot lyrics to songs he had sung thousands of times. His words came out slurred and confused. He would have to sit down in the middle of shows because standing was too exhausting. The jumpsuit could not hide how swollen and sick he looked, yet he kept trying, kept performing, because being Elvis was all he knew how to do. Ginger Alden, his girlfriend at the time, watched him deteriorate in those final days. She described him being unable to sleep, pacing the halls of Graceland at night, clearly in pain and scared. He knew he was dying but did not know how to stop it. August 16, 1977 arrived like any other summer day. Elvis went to the bathroom in the afternoon and never came back out. Ginger found him collapsed on the floor, his face pressed against the carpet. The king of rock and roll passed away alone on a bathroom floor, far from the stage and the crowds that loved him. It was an undignified end for someone who had brought so much joy to the world. The initial autopsy was rushed and incomplete. Officials listed heart attack as the cause of death and mentioned substance use, but they covered up the full extent of Elvis's health crisis. They hid how many different organ systems had failed, how sick he truly was. The family wanted to protect his image and legacy. The world was told a simple story about substances in excess, when the truth was so much more complicated and sad. For decades, Elvis was remembered as someone who threw his life away, who could not control himself, who passed away because of poor choices. But the DNA study finally gave him the compassion he deserved. It proved that Elvis was fighting an invisible war against his own biology, battling enemies written into his cells that he never chose and could not defeat. The genetic truth about Elvis raises one final heartbreaking question that changes everything. If he were alive today, with modern medicine and genetic testing, could the king have been saved? Could Elvis have been saved? Looking at Elvis's genetic conditions through the lens of modern medicine creates a heartbreaking what-if scenario. Today, a simple DNA test costing a few $100s could have identified every single genetic mutation that took his life. Doctors would have known exactly what they were dealing with before symptoms even appeared. But in the 1970s, This technology was pure science fiction. If Elvis were diagnosed today with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, he would receive replacement therapy, where the missing protein is given through regular infusions. This treatment can slow or stop the liver and lung damage. He would be monitored carefully with blood tests and scans. His organs could have been protected before they failed. For his hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, modern cardiologists have medications that help the enlarged heart function better and prevent dangerous rhythms. In severe cases, they can implant devices that shock the heart back into rhythm if it stops. Some patients even receive heart transplants. Elvis could have been managed, his life extended by decades. His immune system disorders could be treated with modern immunology substances that help regulate the body's defense systems. His chronic pain from connective tissue problems could be addressed with targeted therapies and pain management that does not rely on addictive opioids. Most importantly, his mental health conditions could have been properly treated with modern antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications specifically designed for people with genetic predispositions. He could have received therapy, support, and understanding instead of judgment. Early intervention would have changed everything. If Elvis had known at age 20 that his DNA carried these time bombs, he could have made different choices. He might have performed less, rested more, avoided the substances that damaged his already vulnerable organs. He could have prepared for what was coming instead of being blindsided by his body's betrayal. Colonel Parker's relentless management style would be seen as abusive today. Pushing someone with known genetic health conditions to perform 2 shows nightly would be considered dangerous and unethical. Better management focused on Elvis's health rather than profit could have added years to his life. The prescription substance culture of the 1970s failed Elvis catastrophically. Doctors handed out pills like candy without understanding substance interactions or long-term effects. Today, there are databases that check every medication against every other one. Doctors monitor patients closely. The free-for, all that allowed Dr. Nick to prescribe whatever Elvis wanted, would never be permitted now. Other celebrities have survived similar genetic conditions with modern care. People with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency now live into their 70s and 80s with proper treatment. Those with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy manage the condition and live full lives. Elvis deserved the same chance. Tragically, the genetic legacy may have continued. His daughter Lisa Marie struggled with her own health issues throughout her life and passed away suddenly in 2023 at age 54 from cardiac arrest. The same genetic heart problems that took her father's life may have took her life too. She never knew to get tested, never knew what was hiding in her DNA until it was too late. This is why genetic testing is so crucial for families like the Presleys. If you have a history of early deaths, heart problems, liver disease, or mental health issues running through your family, knowing your genetic risk can save your life. Knowledge is power when it comes to inherited conditions. Elvis's legacy extends far beyond the tragedy of his death. He revolutionized music and culture. He broke down racial barriers. He brought joy to millions. His humanity, his kindness to fans, his generosity to strangers showed who he really was inside. The DNA study does not diminish his achievements. Instead, it makes them more remarkable. He accomplished all of this while fighting battles no one could see. The genetic findings change our understanding from judgment to compassion. Elvis was not weak or self-destructive. He was incredibly strong to have functioned as long as he did while carrying such a heavy genetic burden. What do you think about this discovery? Do you think Elvis would have been saved if all these were discovered earlier?